my golden child brother, destroyed my grandfather's war watch, blamed me for it, and watched our father beat me unconscious before throwing me into a blizzard to die. I was 14. It was December 15th, 2019, and the temperature outside was 23 degrees below freezing. I remember lying in 8 inches of snow. 1 a.m. blood from my broken nose, turning the white ground red, thinking this was how I was going to die. My ribs were cracked, my face was swollen shut, and my own father had just screamed, "Get out of my house," before slamming the door on his younger son. All because Damon was lying, and Dad chose to believe his precious golden child over the truth. But here's what my father and my brother didn't know that night. My mother was coming back, and she wasn't coming back empty-handed. See, while I was documenting every lie Damon told for 3 years in a black notebook, Mom was building something much more powerful. Legal paperwork, court orders, criminal charges. She had photos of my injuries, police reports, witness statements, and enough evidence to destroy both of them in the most public, humiliating way possible. Because 3 years later, I'm standing at Lincoln High's graduation podium as valedictorian, holding my grandfather's perfectly restored 1952 Omega Seamaster, and my father is in prison. Let me tell you exactly how we made that happen. To understand how we got to that night, you need to know how our family worked. My father, Dennis, owned Henderson Auto Repair, a decent mechanic shop that kept us solidly middle class. He had 2 sons, Damon, who was 19, and clearly destined to inherit the business, and me, Hunter, who was 14, and apparently destined for nothing but disappointment. Damon was everything Dad wanted in a son. Loud, confident, good with his hands, and completely uninterested in school. "Damon's got the right attitude for business," Dad would say, watching my brother charm customers or crack jokes with the other mechanics. Meanwhile, I was pulling straight A's reading engineering books and getting lectures about how book smarts don't fix engines. It didn't matter that Damon barely graduated high school. It didn't matter that he'd already wrecked 2 cars, or that neighbors complained about his parties. In our house, Damon could do no wrong, and I could do no right. When money went missing from Mom's purse, Dad assumed it was me. When the garage tools disappeared, Dad assumed it was me. When anything went wrong, Dad's first question was always, "What did Hunter do now?" I learned early that in our house, truth was optional. That's why I started the notebook when I was 12. It was just a plain black composition book from the school supply aisle, but I treated it like evidence in a court case. Every time Damon lied to get out of trouble, I wrote it down. Date time, what he said, what really happened. I documented everything. The parties he blamed on me, the money he stole, the grades he faked, the stories he told to cover his mistakes. I thought if I could prove Damon was lying, Dad might believe me for once. I thought documentation would matter. I thought facts would win over favoritism. God, I was naive. Every time I tried to show Dad the evidence, he'd get angry at me for keeping score and trying to make your brother look bad. But I kept writing anyway, because somewhere deep down, I hoped someone would eventually care about the truth. By age 14, I had documented 31 lies. The notebook wasn't the only thing I treasured, though. In our house full of disappointment, I had one connection to something greater. My grandfather's 1952 Omega Seamaster sat in a place of honor on Dad's dresser. Grandpa Joe had worn it through World War II in the Pacific Theater. It had survived Pearl Harbor D-Day, years of combat, and decades afterward. This wasn't just any watch. It was worth $3,200 and represented everything I respected about strength, endurance, and honor. Dad always said it would go to the responsible son when he was ready. For years, I assumed that meant me. I was the one who asked about Grandpa's war stories. I was the one who understood what that watch represented. I should have known Damon would want it. December 15th, 2019. 11:30 p.m. I was in my room finishing calculus homework when I heard the crash from Dad's bedroom. Then I heard Damon swearing, really creative, panicked swearing that told me something expensive had just broken. I found him standing over Dad's dresser, staring down at what used to be Grandpa's Omega Seamaster. The crystal face was completely shattered. Tiny gears and springs were scattered across the hardwood floor like mechanical confetti. The leather band was torn. 3 generations of family history destroyed in one careless moment. "What did you do?" I whispered, staring at the wreckage. Damon had been drunk trying to grab his phone charger from behind the dresser. His elbow had caught the watch case, sending it crashing to the floor. For maybe 10 seconds, I saw real fear in his eyes. He understood exactly what he'd done. This wasn't just any watch. This was Dad's most prized possession, worth more than our car, irreplaceable, sacred. And then he looked at me and smiled. "You know what, little brother? This is actually perfect." He started scooping up pieces of the watch, his panic transforming into something much more calculated. "Dad's going to lose his mind when he sees this. Someone's going to pay for destroying Grandpa's watch." I watched in horror as Damon carefully collected the broken crystal, the bent hands, the scattered gears. He was methodical about it, like he was planning something. "Damon, what are you doing? Just tell Dad what happened. It was an accident." "An accident?" He laughed, walking toward my bedroom with a handful of watch parts. "Hunter, you don't understand. Dad already thinks you're a screw-up. He's already looking for reasons to be disappointed in you. This just makes it easy." He planted the pieces in my desk drawer, scattered some on my floor, even rubbed crystal dust on my sleeve. Damon was lying, but Dad wanted to believe him. That was the whole problem. In our house, Damon's word was gospel, and mine was always suspicious. When Dad found those pieces in my drawer, I knew I was dead. Dad found me 20 minutes later, holding the evidence Damon had planted. He stood in my doorway at 6'2" and 20 pounds of pure mechanic muscle, his face red with rage, clutching pieces of Grandpa's shattered watch in his massive hands. "Care to explain this, Hunter?" I tried to tell him the truth. "God, I really tried. Dad, I didn't break it. Damon was in your room getting his charger, and he knocked it over. I saw the whole thing happen." "So now you're calling your brother a liar?" "I'm not calling him anything. I'm telling you what I saw. He was drunk. He hit it with his elbow, and then what? He decided to frame his innocent little brother." Dad's voice was getting louder, more dangerous. "You think Damon planted evidence in your room like some kind of criminal mastermind?" I pulled out my black notebook, flipping to the pages where I documented Damon's other lies. "Dad, look. He's lied before. Remember when money went missing from Mom's purse? Or when—" He slapped the notebook out of my hand, sending it flying across the room. "You've been keeping a list of your brother's mistakes." "What kind of sick kid does that? The kind who wants someone to believe the truth for once." That's when his face changed. The anger shifted into something colder, more personal. "You know what? You're just like your mother. Always making everyone else the problem, never taking responsibility for your own actions." I should have seen the punch coming, but I was 14, and he was my father. Fathers don't hit their sons in the face with closed fists. Except mine did. The first punch broke my nose. What happened next, I can only describe in clinical terms, because that's how the doctors would later document it, in the medical reports that would become evidence in court. The second impact resulted in 2 fractured ribs on my left side. The third caused a concussion when my head struck the corner of my wooden desk. The laceration above my left eye measured 3 inches and required 12 stitches to close properly. Multiple contusions across my face and torso. Significant facial swelling, blood loss requiring immediate medical attention. Those are the words that would appear on official hospital paperwork. What they don't capture is the sound of my father's breathing as he beat his 14-year-old son unconscious. What they don't describe is the moment when a parent stops being a protector and becomes a predator. I remember thinking as my vision tunneled and consciousness slipped away that this documentation would matter someday, that someone would eventually care about the medical evidence of what happened in this room. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Pack a bag. You're not my son anymore. I want you out of this house, and I never want to see your lying face again." It was 12:45 a.m. on December 15th. Outside, a blizzard was dumping 8 inches of snow on our town. The temperature was 23 degrees below freezing. I had no coat. It was hanging in the front closet, but Dad was blocking my path to it. I had no money, no phone, and blood was still streaming from my nose and eye. This wasn't just abandonment. In those weather conditions, this was attempted murder. And the precise timing, the specific circumstances, the deliberate denial of winter clothing, all of that would become the linchpin of the criminal case that would eventually destroy him. "Get out of my house!" I had nowhere to go except Leo's house. Leo's house was 6 blocks away through ankle-deep snow. I stumbled through the blizzard, leaving a trail of blood drops in the white powder, my vision blurring from the concussion. Every step sent lightning through my cracked ribs. By the time I reached the Hendersons' front porch, I was hypothermic, barely conscious, and probably minutes away from collapsing in their yard. I knocked on their door at 1:15 a.m., and Amy Henderson opened it to find a 14-year-old boy, covered in blood and snow, swaying on her doorstep. "Jesus Christ, Hunter, what happened to you?" Carl and Amy Henderson weren't just Leo's parents. They were the kind of adults who actually gave a damn about kids in trouble. Within 30 seconds, Carl was wrapping me in blankets while Amy was taking photos of my injuries with her phone. Not because they were thinking about evidence, they were just good people documenting something that was clearly wrong. "Who did this to you?" Carl asked, his voice steady, but his hands shaking as he examined my swollen face. "My dad," I whispered through broken lips. They didn't ask if I was sure. They didn't suggest I might have misunderstood. They didn't tell me that fathers don't hurt their children. Carl took one look at me and called the police. Officer Martinez arrived at 2:30 a.m. and immediately called for an ambulance. He was a 20-year veteran who'd seen plenty of domestic violence, and he didn't waste time with questions like, "Are you sure this is what happened?" Instead, he started documenting everything systematically. Police report 47. Multiple facial contusions consistent with blunt force trauma. Suspected rib fractures. Victim found in severe hypothermic condition after being forced from residence during blizzard warning. Perpetrator, Dennis Hunter. Father, victim. Hunter Mitchell, Hunter minor, age 14. The medical examination at County General took 3 hours. X-rays confirmed 2 fractured ribs and a mild concussion. The facial laceration required 12 stitches. They documented everything, every bruise, every cut, every piece of evidence that would become the foundation of a criminal case that my father never saw coming. The nurse kept asking if there was someone they could call. "Is there a parent or guardian we can contact?" I almost said no. After all, my father had just tried to kill me, and I hadn't spoken to my mother in 2 years. But Amy Henderson, who'd been sitting in the waiting room all night like the mother I should have had, spoke up. That's when Amy told me she'd called my mom. My mother, Sarah, had been living in Phoenix for 2 years, ever since she'd finally had enough of Dad's anger and Damon's enabling. She'd left to preserve her sanity, but she'd never stopped being my mother. When Amy called her at 3 a.m. Eastern Time and explained what had happened, Mom was on the first flight back to Ohio. She walked into my hospital room 12 hours later, took one look at my bandaged face and the police report in my hands, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not just anger, strategic fury. The kind of determination that builds legal cases and destroys the people who hurt your children. My mom had spent 2 years working as a paralegal in Phoenix. She understood family court procedures, custody law, and criminal prosecution. She knew exactly how to turn documentation into justice. She took one look at my face and said, "We're going to destroy them." The next morning, Mom spread every piece of evidence across the kitchen table at Leo's house, like she was preparing for war. This wasn't emotional revenge. This was systematic legal destruction. Her 2 years as a paralegal in Phoenix had taught her exactly how to build an airtight case against someone who thought they were untouchable. "Hunter, I need you to understand something," she said, organizing documents into precise stacks. "Your father thinks he can get away with this because he's always gotten away with everything. Men like Dennis believe that family business stays private, that no one will ever challenge their authority. They're wrong." She'd already filed for emergency custody, but that was just the beginning. Mom knew family court procedures, criminal law timelines, and exactly which documents would matter most to judges. She had contact information for domestic violence advocates, knew how to request police body cam footage, and understood the difference between civil and criminal proceedings. "We're going to file the emergency custody motion within 48 hours, she explained, pointing to forms she'd already started filling out. "But first we need to catalog everything systematically." That's when I handed her my black notebook. She opened that black notebook and smiled. For the next 6 hours, we transformed 3 years of my desperate documentation into legal evidence. Every lie I'd recorded about Damon wasn't just teenage frustration anymore. It was a pattern of deception that demonstrated systematic family dysfunction. The 42 source. 2 documented instances of Damon lying to cover his mistakes, steal money, or blame me for his problems suddenly looked like what they were. Evidence of a family system that rewarded dishonesty and punished truth-telling. Mom made photocopies of every page, cross-referenced dates with bank statements and school records, and created a timeline that showed how Dad's favoritism had escalated over years. She had the medical records from County General documenting my injuries. She had police report number 2019-947 with Officer Martinez's detailed observations. She had witness statements from Carl and Amy Henderson, complete with photographs they'd taken of my injuries. "This is already enough to destroy your father in court," Mom said, organizing everything into clear plastic sleeves. "But we need to think bigger than just custody. We need to make sure this never happens to you again." She was building something more comprehensive than just a divorce case. This was documentation for criminal assault charges, civil liability claims, and public exposure of everything Dennis and Damon had done wrong. But we weren't done gathering evidence yet. The breakthrough came when Leo's cousin Lana reached out 3 days later. She was a sophomore at Lincoln High, same school where Damon was supposedly earning the academic credentials that would get him into State University on a partial scholarship. Lana had heard about what happened to me through family connections, and she had something she thought we needed to see. "I've been recording Damon cheating in AP history for months," she told us, pulling out her phone. "Not because I was trying to get him in trouble, but because I couldn't believe how blatant he was about it." The video was devastating. Clear footage of Damon copying answers during a test, sneaking photos of other students' papers, and even bribing a girl to let him see her completed assignment before class. But that wasn't the worst part. Lana also had screenshots of emails between Damon and a student who was essentially doing his homework for him. For money. Text messages showing him buying test answers. Evidence of grade manipulation, where he'd convinced teachers to give him extra credit for work he'd never completed. The guidance counselor has been telling everyone what a turnaround story Damon is, Lana explained. How he'd improved so much academically this year. But it's all fake. His entire senior year transcript is fraudulent. This wasn't just academic dishonesty. This was criminal fraud affecting his scholarship eligibility and college admission. More importantly, it was the perfect ammunition for destroying the family's public image of Damon as the responsible son who deserved Dad's favoritism. "Hunter, this changes everything," Mom said, looking at the evidence on her laptop screen. "Your father chose Damon over you because he believed Damon was the successful one, the responsible one, the son worth investing in. When people see that Damon's entire academic success is built on lies and fraud, it's going to recontextualize everything." She started copying the video files to our evidence folder, adding them to the growing collection of receipts that would soon be presented in court. But I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was thinking about more than just legal proceedings. "Mom, what are you planning?" She looked up at me with that same strategic smile I'd seen when she opened my notebook. "We're not just going to win in family court, Hunter. We're going to make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who your father and brother really are." Mom said we'd use this at the perfect moment. December 18th, 3 days after the beating, we stood in family court 4 before Judge Rodriguez. Mom had filed the emergency custody motion with surgical precision. Medical records, police reports, witness statements, and photos, all organized in a way that told an undeniable story. Dad showed up in his cleanest work shirt, probably thinking he could charm his way through this, like he charmed customers at the auto shop. He was wrong. Judge Rodriguez was a 20-year veteran of family court who'd seen every possible excuse for child abuse. When she reviewed the evidence, the medical documentation of my concussion and fractured ribs, the police report describing how Dad had thrown me out in a blizzard, the photos Amy Henderson had taken of my bloody face, her expression shifted from professional neutrality to barely controlled disgust. "Mr. Hunter," she said, looking directly at my father, "you will have no contact with your minor son except through supervised visitation, which frankly I'm not inclined to grant. The temporary restraining order is effective immediately." Dad tried to interrupt, started saying something about misunderstandings and teenage exaggeration, but Judge Rodriguez cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell over. The judge looked at Dad like he was garbage. That legal victory gave us the foundation we needed, but Mom was already thinking 3 steps ahead, while Dad was dealing with the reality that he'd lost custody of his son. Mom was coordinating with Lincoln High School to set up something much more comprehensive than a simple family court case. Principal Martinez was initially reluctant to get involved in what looked like family drama, but when Mom showed him Lana's video evidence of Damon's academic fraud, his attitude changed completely. This wasn't just about domestic violence anymore. This was about a student who had fraudulently obtained grades potentially affecting his scholarship eligibility and college admission. "Mrs. Hunter," Principal Martinez said, reviewing the evidence on his laptop, "if this documentation is accurate, then Damon's academic record for his entire senior year is compromised. We'll need to conduct a full review." Mom had done her homework. She knew that Lincoln High's annual awards ceremony was scheduled for January 15th, and she knew that Damon was receiving the Student of Character Award based on his supposedly improved academic performance. The irony was too perfect to waste. "Principal Martinez, I think it would be appropriate to address these concerns publicly during the ceremony where Damon's character is being celebrated," Mom suggested with the kind of diplomatic tone that made her request sound like a reasonable administrative procedure. They said Damon's scholarship would be revisited. But as the date approached, I started falling apart. 3 sleepless nights in a row, anxiety attacks every time I thought about facing Damon and potentially Dad in a room full of people. Part of me wanted justice, wanted to see them held accountable for everything they'd done. But another part of me just wanted to disappear, to avoid the public attention and the confrontation. "What if no one believes us?" I asked Mom the night before the ceremony. "What if people think we're just bitter about the custody thing?" "Hunter, look at me," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed like she used to when I was little and had nightmares. "We have documentation. We have witnesses. We have video evidence. We have medical records. The truth doesn't need people to believe it. It just needs to be revealed." She was right, but that didn't make me less terrified. Mom said, "The truth is going to set you free." January 15th. Lincoln High's gymnasium was packed with 300 people. Parents, students, faculty, school board members, and local community leaders. The annual awards ceremony was always a big deal, but this year felt different. Mom and I sat in the back row watching as Damon walked across the stage in his best khakis and button-down shirt, grinning like he'd won the lottery. The Student of Character Award was the evening's most prestigious honor, given to a senior who demonstrated both academic improvement and moral leadership. Principal Martinez read from Damon's nomination letter, praising his remarkable turnaround in academic performance and his commitment to honesty and integrity in all his endeavors. If I hadn't been so terrified, I might have laughed at the irony. Dad was sitting in the 3rd row, beaming with pride, as his golden child received recognition for character traits he'd never actually possessed. He'd probably been telling everyone at the auto shop about his son's big award, how Damon had really turned his life around, how proud he was of the boy's work ethic and moral fiber. He had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, both of his son's futures would be decided in front of the entire community. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Martinez announced after Damon had posed for photos with his award. "Before we continue with tonight's ceremony, the school administration needs to address some concerns that have come to our attention regarding academic integrity." That's when Principal Martinez asked Damon to stay on stage. You could feel the energy in the room shift. Parents looked confused. Students started whispering. Damon's smile faltered just a little, but he was still playing the part of the confident golden child who'd never done anything wrong in his life. "Damon, we've received documentation suggesting that your improved academic performance this year may not reflect your actual work," Principal Martinez said, his voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium's sound system. Mom stood up and walked toward the front of the room, carrying a USB drive that contained everything we'd spent weeks compiling. The same systematic documentation that had won us custody court was about to destroy Damon's reputation in the most public way possible. "Mrs. Hunter has provided the school with evidence that we believe the community should see, particularly given tonight's celebration of character and integrity," Principal Martinez announced as Mom connected the USB drive to the presentation system. The first thing that appeared on the large screen was Lana's video of Damon cheating during his AP history test. Crystal clear footage of him copying answers, taking photos of other students' papers, and even passing money to a classmate for access to completed assignments. The sound quality was perfect. You could hear him whispering instructions about which answers to share. But the video was just the beginning. Mom had organized everything chronologically, showing the progression of Damon's academic fraud throughout his senior year. Email screenshots revealed an entire network of students who were essentially doing his homework for payment. Text messages showed him buying test answers from multiple sources. Grade manipulation evidence demonstrated how he'd convinced teachers to give him extra credit for work he'd never actually completed. The gymnasium went completely silent. 300 people watched as every piece of Damon's supposed academic success was revealed to be a lie. His improved GPA, his scholarship eligibility, his college admission, all of it built on systematic fraud and deception. The same golden child who'd been favored over me for years was being exposed as a cheater and a liar in front of everyone who mattered in our small town. Damon tried to deny it, of course. He started saying something about misunderstandings and taken out of context, but the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. When you're caught on video cheating, when your text messages are displayed on a giant screen, when your own emails prove you've been buying grades, there's no way to spin that as a misunderstanding. Dad stood up from his seat, his face red with embarrassment and rage. He started walking toward the stage, probably planning to do what he always did: protect Damon and blame someone else for the consequences of his golden child's actions. He never made it to the front of the room. Officer Martinez was waiting near the gymnasium entrance with an arrest warrant. The same officer who'd taken my statement 3 weeks earlier, who'd documented my injuries, and written the police report that had started this whole legal process. The criminal charges for assault had been filed days ago, but law enforcement had been waiting for the right moment to serve the warrant. They'd coordinated with Mom to make sure Dad's arrest happened in front of the same community that was witnessing Damon's academic fraud exposure. Maximum public impact, maximum humiliation, maximum justice. "Dennis Hunter, you're under arrest for assault in the 2nd degree," Officer Martinez announced as he cuffed my father in front of 300 witnesses. "You have the right to remain silent." Dad looked around the gymnasium desperately, probably expecting sympathy from people who knew him as the hard-working auto shop owner. Instead, he saw the community members who'd just watched his golden child get exposed as a fraud, and who were now watching him get arrested for beating his younger son unconscious. He finally understood that the golden child couldn't save him. The legal aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Dad pled guilty to assault charges rather than face a jury trial, where the evidence of his violence would be presented in even more detail. 18 months in county jail, full custody to Mom, and liquidation of the auto shop to pay legal fees and restitution. The business Dad had spent 20 years building was gone in 6 months. Judge Rodriguez made the custody arrangement permanent and added a condition that gave me everything I'd never dared to hope for. Mr. Hunter will have no contact with his son, supervised or otherwise, until the minor reaches age 18. At that time, any contact will be entirely at Hunter Mitchell Hunter's discretion. The judge said I'd never have to see him again. Damon's consequences took longer to unfold, but they were equally satisfying. His high school diploma was revoked due to academic fraud. His college admission was rescinded. His scholarship disappeared. By the time I graduated as valedictorian 3 years later, Damon was working minimum wage at a gas station, still living with relatives, still making excuses for why nothing was ever his fault. Meanwhile, I built the life they'd always said I was too weak, too difficult, too problematic to achieve. Straight A's through high school, full scholarship to State University for engineering, academic honors internships, and a future that had nothing to do with the family that had tried to destroy me. At graduation, I wore Grandpa's restored 1952 Omega Seamaster on my wrist as I gave the valedictorian speech to a packed auditorium. The same watch that had nearly been destroyed by Damon's carelessness and Dad's favoritism now ticked steadily through my moment of triumph. I built the life they said I'd never have. The beautiful irony is that Dad and Damon became exactly what they'd always accused me of being. Dad became the family disappointment, the one who brought shame to our name. Damon became the irresponsible failure, the son who couldn't be trusted with anything important. And me, I became irrelevant to their dysfunction. I don't think about them anymore. I don't wonder what they're doing, or whether they've learned anything from the consequences of their actions. I don't hope for apologies or reconciliation. They became exactly what they always said I was, nothing